here, and of course all our speakers are right here with us. So I would like to welcome you all. And before we start this, I would like to share with you a little bit of ground rules or something do's and don'ts while we are having it. But particularly, you must have read it when you received the invite. So just a few things to reiterate that please keep your mic muted so we can easily able to hear each other, and you can always send your question even before we like the speakers finish the discussion through in the chat box through messages in this Zoom inbox. And then please be mindful that we would like to end the event on time. So we would be very particular with regards to the timings for our respectable speakers. And of course, we would like to have questions afterwards during the round of questions. And we would like to request, please don't only send the comments. We would appreciate having questions relevant to the discussions we are having here. And then please do note that this recording, this webinar would be recorded and it would be published online later. So you know it, so you have an informed consent to participate in it. So these are the main things we would like to share with you before we start it. And as you know, and you have read from the invite, that it's going to be around the state of minorities in South Asia, particularly this year's report of South Asia Collective, which is a collective of activists and organizations working in South Asia, particularly for minority rights for indigenous people. So this report is particularly focusing on the people who are stateless, migrant and refugee, and while they are from the minority community as well, and nowadays when we are facing COVID-19, so how it is affecting them all over South Asia. So this is the main theme line of today, and our speakers, honorable speakers, would be sharing their experience on it. And of course, our speakers who have done these reports or who have done this research, and then we were able to come up collectively with this report, which we are going to launch today through this webinar without having a physical launch because of the situation. So it's great to have all of you. Welcome once again, and we wish you all the very best, and we are happy to have you in these difficult times that you make some time to available with us. With this, I would like to, first of all, I would like to welcome our very distinguished speaker today for the introductory remarks, and with a very, very pertinent, important work around the world with regards to minority rights. So I would like to like Dr. Burenis with us, Professor Burenis with us, who is a special rapporteur at UN on minority issues. He's working there since 2017, and his work and commitment focuses on human rights of minorities particularly, as well as of prevention of ethnic conflicts and rights of migrants, and the relationship between ethnicity, human rights, and democracies. He has been involved in numerous forums on these issues, including UN committees in Geneva, the European Parliament in Brussels, and with the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities. So it's a very brief intro of his great work he has been doing. So I would like to request Professor Burenis to please speak on the topic we are having today.
Thank you, Namana. Good morning, everyone. Well, at least it's morning for me here in Canada. It's nice and sunny, though, but we did have snowflakes yesterday. First, let me congratulate all those involved in the South Asia Collective for this flagship publication, which we're now launching. So this is obviously the 2019 South Asia State of Minorities Report. And let me congratulate you particularly in relation to your focus on migrants, minorities, refugees, and the stateless. I congratulate you because of the timeliness of this edition. Minorities, migrants, and refugees in South Asia, we have to say, increasingly find themselves at the receiving end of obstacles in the recognition and respect of their most basic of human rights, including in terms of citizenship, and even the very existential issue of access to health information and healthcare during this pandemic crisis. Without adopting too negative a tone, we're going through a very difficult and challenging period indeed, with even the universality of human rights no longer necessarily as widely acknowledged or respected by governments as in the past. I think there are real challenges here because we are facing some opposition or resistance. And where minorities in particular, we have to also admit, become convenient scapegoats to blame, outsiders to fear, and targets to hate. And we're seeing that all around the world, and I'm not specifically focusing on South Asia. But the South Asia State of Minorities report we're launching does offer a much needed research, discussion, and reflection of what I think is an increasingly fragile state of the human rights of minorities in the region. And particularly what you're doing is focuses on research and analysis of the reality on the ground and the factors involved in order to hopefully provide urgently needed in-depth understanding of the context, and in some cases, even suggestions of the ways forward to tackle some of these fundamental human rights concerns. And I think perhaps the most fundamental of these human rights concerns is the issue of statelessness, which, as some of you know, was the thematic priority of my mandate as UN Special Rapporteur in 2018, including at the 11th session of the United Nations Forum on Minority Issues, which actually had adopted the theme, if you will, more precisely, of statelessness as a minority issue. I think we all know, without citizenship, individuals, and this quite often can include refugees or migrants and minorities, may not have access, in fact. They have clear obstacles to access to information. Speaking of the pandemic, the issues of access to testing or even medical care against COVID can be a serious, extremely serious matter. In fact, they may not have also access to education, housing, employment, and be excluded from most other social and other services because they don't belong, they're not citizens. So their inequality also, because once again, refugees, migrants, and many minorities find themselves in societies where where inequality linked to poverty renders them amongst the most marginalized communities, and at the same time, most vulnerable to the COVID pandemic. And to the extent in which statelessness is the basic obstacle to most fundamental human rights, to a scale that is unimaginable to most of us. Just a quick reminder of why the Forum on Minority Issues in Geneva in 2018 actually considered that statelessness is a minority issue. And I always try to refer to this because I don't think it's appreciated the extent that for minorities, including many situations, migrants and refugees who are stateless, how much this is a minority issue. What I mean is if you consider the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, when it acknowledged in 2017 that that more than 3/4, more than 75% of the world's estimated stateless population of over 10 million at the time, let's say, these are people who belong to minorities. And this proportion is increasingly significantly. And I have to say, increasing significantly, particularly in South Asia, as minorities in the region are being targeted This is widely acknowledged in relation to situations occurring in India in a way which may result in millions more, mainly members of the Muslim minority, being unable to prove to the satisfaction of authorities that they are citizens, which means that in fact we are seeing a huge increase due to mainly events in Asia, South Asia, which will also be resulting in human suffering and denial of basic decency and protections to a scale that we haven't seen for a very long time. If this happens, and I think between us we can acknowledge this, if this happens, the UNHCR campaign to eradicate statelessness in the world by 2024 will be a complete failure. I don't hesitate to say that, because that's the reality. I think that we've been in denial, mainly because of the treatment of minorities in this region on the issue of statelessness. However, the occasion of this launch is a much needed boost. The South Asia State of Minorities report is an important and timely contribution, which helps to address, I think, the gap perhaps on the nature and extent of numerous issues at the intersections of human rights of minorities and of obstacles to the recognition or denial of citizenship across the region, particularly as it may involve issues that is referred to in different parts of the book in relations to prohibited discrimination affecting, for example, upcountry Tamils from Sri Lanka, the Biharis of Bangladesh, the Rohingya of Myanmar, and others, of course. So I think we must acknowledge, we must give kudos where it belongs. If this book, this report, provides critical insight into minority human rights issues that are entangled also in emerging developments in South Asia. And it helps point to also to the gendered impacts of new documentary requirements, which can be particularly severe for minority women, an area which, in my opinion, requires also further addition. So my reading of the invaluable research and insights in the findings of this report confirm my view, provide, in my view, useful observations on the common patterns that exist. And in particular, and I always emphasize this dimension also in my work, in particular the central role of discrimination on the basis of religion, ethnicity, language also, and others, and how this is central to the main challenges minorities, refugees, and migrants often face, not only in relation to statelessness matters, but also as perhaps the main driver of inequality in many of the region's countries, and another problematic factor in relation to, connected to intolerance and even hate and persecution that is also, unfortunately, on the uptick, rising in many countries in the region. So once again, congratulations with the publication of this report. I'm pleased and honored to be a bit early in the morning for me, I have to admit, but I'm still honored and pleased to be part of today's launch of another brick, by the way, not a brick to a wall, but a brick for the shelter that are human rights, which we must continually build and maintain to protect all members of society, and including the most vulnerable, such as minorities, refugees, and migrants. So once again, congratulations, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in this webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Burenes. We are really glad to have you, and thank you so much for your very rich input on this report and encouraging all the people who have been involved in this research and drafting it. It's really a pleasure to have you with us. So now I would like to request our next speaker. And before I would give the floor our next speaker, I would like to request to all the speakers to please be strict to 6 minutes for their speech, so we would be able, in this case, to conclude this webinar timely. So we are having Mr. Hassan Ali Faiz with us. He is a research director at Afghanistan Civil Society and Human Rights Network. And the chapter in this report on the situation of minorities in South Asia. So the review of the situation of 3 minority groups in the country: Hazaras, Ismaili Shias, and Hindu Sikhs, that is being done by this center. And Mr. Faiz is the person who has done this chapter to be included in this report. So the floor is yours, Mr. Hassan.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm really happy to present the chapter of Afghanistan. However, the Afghanistan chapter is a little bit different from other chapters, because the Afghanistan chapter somehow deviates from the main theme of refugees, stateless, and migrants. Because in Afghanistan, we do not have refugees, and we do not have stateless and migrants. We have a number of refugees who have migrated from Pakistan during the conflict in northern Waziristan of Pakistan, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. There's a number of them who have migrated to Afghanistan, and they reside in the coast province of Afghanistan. The place where they live is not accessible for us, and so there's not enough information on them. And on the stateless, we also do not have a stateless in Afghanistan. Though there is a community called Jogi or Churi Furush. They are considered to be stateless. But I remember at the time of the former president of Afghanistan, Mr. Hamid Karzai, a number of them have been issued national identity card. So we really do not know how many of them are still stateless. They are quite dispersed in different big cities, in particular in Kabul, but unfortunately there is not enough information on them. So we had to deviate from the main theme of the report, and we had to concentrate on the ethnic and religious minorities. So we concentrated on the Shias and Hindu Sikh religious minorities, and as well as the Hazara and Ismaili ethnic minorities. The history of minorities, unfortunately, in Afghanistan is a history of repression, persecution, and discrimination. And in circumstances, the history is a history of, unfortunately, ethnic cleansing. So that sort of trend, unfortunately, continued from the past to the present, while with fluctuations. And there were circumstances when minorities were really had the opportunity to engage in social activities. There were opportunities for them to breathe a sigh of relief, but more or less the history, unfortunately, has been a history of repression for minorities. Now, with the issue being so rife, unfortunately, civil society organizations, they have been reluctant to work on the issue of minorities because it is quite a sensitive issue, and majority of civil society organizations, they really do not like to get involved into some sensitive issue, because when you're working on sensitive issue, you're doing something which the government does not like. When the government does not like something that you're doing, and that could pose trouble for you in your work. So that is why majority of civil society organizations, unfortunately, they're not working on the issue of minorities. It has become a sort of a taboo, I mean, because since the collapse of the Taliban regime, I mean, before that we were in war. However, after that we are still in war, but after that there was a room work on the issue of discrimination against minorities, but the organizations have not been working on the issue. The Civil Society and Human Rights Network is the only organization that is working on the issue of minorities in Afghanistan. There is not enough scholarship available on the issue of minorities. Now, with the election, with the re-election of our president, who has been somehow known for his biased approach toward minorities, from 2014 until now, there has been a sort of ethnic politics. I mean, ethnic politics is somehow gaining momentum under this president. So everything, unfortunately, around minorities gets politicized. Now, the issue of majority and minority is one of them. I mean, if you are, so even a very small minority may not like to be called a minority, because when you're a minority, it automatically tells you that you have less privilege, you have less right in the government. So if you're called a majority, you automatically, I mean, deserve more rights and more privilege. That is why the issue of minority and majority gets really complicated and it gets really politicized. So it was one of the findings of us that even the minorities really they do not like to be called minorities. On the other hand, with the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, these minorities, religious minorities, they unfortunately have come under constant attack from the Islamist militias like the Taliban and like the ISIS. And in the past couple of months, I mean, there are hundreds, even thousands of civilians who have been killed or injured in sort of a sectarian attacks on them. And now with the impact of COVID-19 on minorities, well, we do not have any example for that of a particular impact of COVID-19 on minorities in Afghanistan. But overall, since the whole system is discriminatory, so any approach of the government might have some sort of negative impact on the services that are provided to the public. Well, though I'm insisting that we do not have right now, still we do not have any specific example, but since the existence of discrimination in the government and the discriminatory approach of the government, I mean, the members of the ethnic minorities or religious minorities, they will suddenly fall through the cracks. So, well, we have designed a project that is monitoring to see whether the members of ethnic minorities are discriminated or not at the time of COVID-19. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hassan. It was great to have you. And thank you for this very rich input and sharing your experience. And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Zakir Hussain. He's from Nagori Udyog, Bangladesh. And Mr. Zakir Hussain heads this organization. And this human rights organization working for the rights of socially excluded and marginalized communities. So he is going to share the state of statelessness in Bangladesh and its overview, and with regards to any current recent experience with regards to COVID-19. So over to you, Mr. Zakir. Thank you.
Thank you very much organizing such a wonderful meeting after a long time, you know. We are connected now. Thank you so much. And really, I would like to thank once again the special report you're writing the forward for our report. So it's really good what he presented and as well as written as a forward. So thank you very much. So first of all, that in general situation, overall situation, I want to let you know what is the minority we mean in Bangladesh. In fact, if you call the Muslim majority, it's about 90%. So 10% is a minority. Within this 10%, there are many different groups. One is religious minority. Religious minority is basically Hindu religion. Within the Hindu religion, if you say that it is 9% almost, and out of 9%, you can say the caste affected groups within the Hindu religions group, caste affected is 4.5%. So that's a bit higher caste is about 5.4% or something like that. So this is, and there is a large group in indigenous minorities, ethnic and indigenous. A part of the indigenous groups, they lives in a Chittagong Hill Tracts. You may know in South Asian people that Chittagong Hill Tracts is a conflicting zone. There is a war and they took arms, and in 1997 there is a peace accord between Bangladesh government and the arms group. So it's 1998. This current government, they were in the power. They come to the consensus that there will be peace process started in the Hill Tracts. But unfortunately, the agreement did not still fully implemented. They claim that government claimed that we have implemented 90% of the agreement, but it is not. It is not the fact. They are slowly implementing this, and they are not implementing this, especially land issues. Mainstreaming people are put it there. So now they are not is minority. In fact, Muslims community getting more equal number. So this is the group, and there are the linguistic minority. 1971 we fought against for our independence. At that time, there are 1947 when people migrated from India, especially from Bihar. They are the Bihari Muslims we call. In fact, they speak Urdu, so linguistic minority as per our event. So this linguistic minority comprises about 0.1 million. So they lives in 117 different ghetto colonies and camps. Immediately after independence, they were forced to leave their houses. They were established people in the city, so they are living last 50 years, 48 years in a slums, you can say. So this is one category, and now the problem is the Rohingya. So the linguistic minority was not the citizen in Bangladesh till 1998. The people went to the court, and our Supreme Court gave a verdict saying that they are seeking for the citizenship, so their citizenship should be allowed. So they got the citizenship in 1998. And after that, it is a big struggle. We are working with them to get the national civil document, you can say. So it's not the court order, but they have to, it should be translated into the reality. They should recognize a citizen. It's a big struggle we are doing. So as you say, the citizenship is a matter. They are formally citizen, but they don't have a citizenship rights as well, because they are still in a living in a camp. The Geneva camp, Geneva Convention, all the groups are there. So even they applied for the passport, it's very difficult to get the passport, very difficult to get the license to operate a business and all this. So they are not getting, and the other different ethnic groups are there. They are the citizen of Bangladesh, but they don't get the citizenship rights. They are very untouchability practices are there. They cannot get the health support and all these social support networks that Bangladesh government has. Social safety net. We are very poor. System in our social security system is very poor. So this is the system. But unfortunately, if you see in South Asian context, every country has some sort of laws. Our constitution in one sentence say, okay, there should not be any discrimination based on race, caste and all these. But there is no protection mechanism, unfortunately, because I must say the protection, legal protection, institutional protection, there is nothing for in Bangladesh to protect the minority rights. There is no legal protection. People are saying we are demanding for, religious commission, minority commission, or ministry, or whatever the departments, it is not there. We are fighting for the Anti-Discrimination Act. It is not there. We started in the last 5 years. It is not there. So this is the situation. And the Rohingya issues, you all know, Rohingya issues that everyone knows that what is happening in Rohingya issues is a global concern. And currently, you know that some of them are trying to leave the Bangladesh to go to for their better future to take the shelters in Malaysia, but Malaysian security forces did not allow them to enter the country, and they're coming back. Bangladesh government again. Still there are two vessels is in the middle of the sea, and they don't have food, nothing. So Bangladesh government is saying that only Bangladesh. Why international community is pushing on Bangladesh that okay, why don't you on the humanitarian ground? Why don't you invite them and again give shelter? But other countries in the South Asian level, they are not doing anything. So Bangladesh government has a valid point, definitely. But we human rights groups also saying that Bangladesh should give them shelter. Of course, that we are doing. This is the Rohingya issues. And Rohingya camps is now is very scary because people are alert that if the COVID-19 is affected in the camps, it would be very difficult because it's so crowded and so in a certain place. And they are crowded. So I have so far we have not detected any COVID affected person in the camp. But in linguistic minority, that Bihari camp, we have already found that 10,000 people lives in a very close to my house. So it's very close to the community that we live. It is already 3% is affected. But there is no very difficult to isolation. We wanted to send them to hospital, but hospital denied that you should treat it at home. It's not so severe. But unfortunately, it's so crowded that they live 5-6 people in a one room, very crowded, 10 by 20, 10 by 12 feet, a small room. They live there. So it's there is a primary school. So we isolated them in a primary school. They're living there. I hope that these 3 people will not affect other people. So that is the one thing. The other things is that we have not found any news from the Dalit colony and other colonies not affected due to COVID-19. But unfortunate part is the most of the minority groups are, especially the Dalit and religious linguistic minority group, they are involved in, mostly they are involved in informal sector work. They lose their job. So the food crisis and livelihood crisis is a huge crisis now. So we are trying a little bit, and in March, end of the March, I knew that there will be a social support network and social capital in Bangladesh. You know, the Ramadan, it's a Ramadan month, and people want to donate something. People want to pay some money to the poor, and all this culture in a Muslim culture, it is there. But unfortunately, these minority groups, they don't belong to the Muslims, of course. And that's true. This is social network support from the social group. So I decided, and we as a group, and because we have a 56 district out of 65 district, we have a 56 district committee to protect the rights of the Dalit. So we wrote a letter to the district commissioner, and just immediately, because we got one case is 8th of March, and we know that this can be a more prevalent in Bangladesh. So we realized that okay, they might the lockdown and everything that is we experience from other countries, and they wrote the letter to the police, local administration and local elected bodies. And finally, it is good news that they responded, because initially we pushed the government authority that if they lost the job, there is no income, nobody will come forward to help them. And the government responded positively, government authority responded positively. They got some support. It's not enough. And some of the tea gardens people are the minority groups and the Dalit groups, and they are also ethnic groups. So some of the tea gardens are lay off last 5 months. They don't get the salary, all this. So we are trying to mobilize some money for them and food staff for them. And you know that those who are our supporter from the international community, we requested them, we applied, but unfortunately they are not in a position to support for livelihood support. So that's the crisis is there. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zakir. Thank you so much for your input and joining us here. So now I would like to request our next speaker, Mr. Sajjad Hassan. He's from Misal. India, and he is the founder of the organization and the senior fellow with the Center for Equity Studies at New Delhi. So he'll be sharing his experience and his work with regards to deploying citizenship to redefine the secular state. And as you know, that the title of our report is Migrant Refugees and the Stateless in South Asia, but particularly he'll be talking about the situation in India. So over to you, Dr. Sija.
Sorry, I'll just turn my camera on. Just give me a second. Yes. Hi, hello everybody. Thank you, Normana, and hello all. Very good to be having this conversation. Thank you to everybody who's been able to join this webinar, and especially to Dr. Fernand de Vernis, the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. I'm going to be reading from a prepared statement. Let me start by reading the first sentences from our report. I quote, rising majoritarian nationalisms have accompanied severe challenges to freedom of religion or belief in most of South Asia. Religious minorities are at particularly high risk of violent attacks, hate speech, and intimidation, and these violations are frequently met with lack of accountability, unquote. Now, this statement applies particularly to India over the last year. India, otherwise a beacon of inclusive governance and diversity in the South Asian region. Over the past years, and rapidly the last, much of that post-independence national consensus to take everybody along has broken down to make space for a muscular form of Hindu nationalism that targets minorities in its quest for power and legitimacy. The consequences for religious minorities, particularly the nation's second largest religious grouping, Muslims, numbering over 200 million, has been severe. A great deal of this contestation has been around questions of citizenship, refugees, and the migrants. India has traditionally been open to refugees and migrants, but this openness is not applied equally to all. Tibetans, Tamils from Sri Lanka, and Chakma and Hajong refugees from Bangladesh receive the full protection of the Indian government. The presence of Afghans and Rohingyas is only acknowledged by the UNHCR. Chins, Rakhine's, and Nagas from Myanmar, all refugees who are assimilated into local communities, are not officially recognized as refugees. And ethnic Nepalis and from Bhutan and religious minority refugees from neighboring countries live in unofficial camps across several states in India. Recently, the official stance against particularly Muslim refugees has been hardening, with Rohingyas who have faced attacks and discrimination now also being forced by authorities to return to Myanmar. Now, part of the problem is structural. India has neither signed the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees, nor devised its own domestic refugee law. As a consequence, refugees and forced migrants are treated on par with other foreigners and governed by the outdated Foreigners Act 1946. Some fundamental rights denied to foreigners are also denied to refugees and asylum seekers as a result. Likewise, India has not ratified the 1954 and 1961 conventions on statelessness. Hence, there's no legal protection of stateless persons. And also the reason for the arbitrariness in how different groups are treated. Now, since taking power in 2014, the BJP government has slowly turned this humanitarian issue into a religious one. In 2015, the government decreed through executive order to allow Afghan, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani nationals belonging to non-Muslim minority communities, specifically Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, Parsi, and Christian, to stay on in India, even without proper documentation. This consideration was not extended to persecuted Muslim communities. Alongside, India has also been disenfranchising some of its own citizens arbitrarily, making them foreigners in their own land, incarcerating them in detention centers. The National Register of Citizens, which is called the NRC, as it is called generally, has recently been drawn up in Assam, excluding some 1.9 million persons, all of who risk being made stateless. In December 2019, Parliament passed the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. In effect,
Can't hear.
Mr. Sajjad, can you please continue?
We can't hear. And
Yes,
Sajjad
probably he's having some, yeah, Mr. Sajjad is
I
having
think his
some
internet connection is
internet,
probably
yes.
lost. Yes.
Yeah. So let us wait for a couple of seconds if we can get back.
maybe send him a WhatsApp that he has, because he may not even be aware of it.
Yes, we have sent.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so seemingly we are not getting hold of Dr. Sajjad, and let us see if he joins us later. So without waiting further, I would like to invite our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Deepak Thapa from Social Science, Baha, and based in Nepal. And the chapter in this report he contributed is Living in Limbo, Tibetan and Bhutanese refugees in Nepal. So he's the director of Social Sciences, Baha, and he writes regularly on Nepal's contemporary social and political issues, and he's the author or editor of several publications, including most recently, Two Steps Forward and One Step Back, and Nepal Peace Process. So I would like to invite Dr. Deepak. Dr. Deepak, the floor is yours.
All right. Hello. Can you turn on the video of my video? I can't do it myself.
You have to turn it on from your side.
Okay. Someone has asked me to. Okay. All right. Yep, got it.
Yeah,
right.
We can see you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Like Sajjad, I will read from my prepared text. The Nepal report was focused on the refugee populations in Nepal. We have primarily two large or largish refugee populations in Nepal, the Tibetans and the Bhutanese. Nepal is also home to a number of other refugees from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Somalia, Iran, Iraq, and the DRC, and a growing number of Rohingya refugees as well. But in all, these numbers are pretty small compared to the Tibetans and the Bhutanese. So the Nepal chapter has focused particularly on the socio-economic situation of the two refugee groups, the Tibetans and the Bhutanese. Both groups were subjected to religious persecution and human rights violations prior to their exodus from their home countries. Tibetans started coming to Nepal after the aborted uprising of 1959. At present, there are over 13,000 Tibetan refugees. They are spread across 14 different settlements across Nepal, some of whom are in urban areas, but some are high up in the mountains near the border with Tibet. But there are a few particularities about the Tibetan refugees that reflect the geopolitical realities of Nepal. Mainly the fact that only these refugees who crossed the border before 1989 are recognized as refugees as such. All the others are considered to be illegal immigrants. In fact, after 1994, Nepal stopped issuing refugee cards to children who had turned 16 and were born to parents holding refugee cards. So that means, in effect, there are a large group of people who are stateless. At present, among the 13,000 plus Tibetan refugees in Nepal, fewer than 25% hold refugee cards. The cards which obviously give them the right to live and travel around Nepal. And because they don't have refugee cards, and because of the geopolitical weight of our northern neighbor, China, the refugees live in constant fear of deportation and are subjected to various kinds of exploitation by the authorities in Nepal. Buddhist refugees, on the other hand, are quite different, mainly because most of them are, or in fact, almost all of them were of Nepali origin. They started coming to Nepal in the late 1980s. They were also fleeing persecution in Bhutan. Bhutan has the dubious distinction of having gotten rid of 1/7 of its entire population. That's a record of some sorts. At the height, there were over 100,000 Buddhist refugees living in 7 camps in Nepal. But now only about 6,500 remain because of the third country resettlement that began in 2008. Thus, over 90% of the Bhutanese population that were in Nepal in the early 2000s have left. They went primarily to 8 different countries around the world: Australia, Canada, Denmark, Holland, New Zealand, Norway, the UK, and the USA. The refugees who are in Nepal are mainly those who are unable to apply for third country resettlement, mainly because they did not have valid refugee cards. And so there are others also who are waiting for one of the 3 solutions that have been mooted. One is, there is a small group of hardcore people who want to go back to Bhutan. There are others who were not able to go for third country resettlement, but are still trying. And there are also those, because they've lived in Nepal for almost 30 years now, hoping to assimilate into Nepal as Nepali citizens. But that is something that has not yet been decided upon by the Nepali government. Funding for Tibetan settlements across Nepal comes from the Central Tibetan Administration in Dharamshala in India, which is run by Tibetans in exile, which is funded by many international donor agencies. In the case of the Bhutanese refugees in Nepal were supported by a number of international organizations and bilateral donors. But after the refugee population began to shrink with the third country resettlement, most of the donors and humanitarian agencies have withdrawn services from the camps. As a result, life is becoming equally difficult for them as well, because as refugees, they're not allowed to work outside the camps. Many of them are very well educated, both Tibetans and Bhutanese, but they are not allowed to work as professionals outside the camps. They're not allowed to get involved in businesses. Sometimes registration is allowed, but all depends on the whim of the bureaucrat in charge. In the Bhutanese refugee camps, there has been cases of separation from family members because of a third country resettlement. Some in the family have been resettled elsewhere, while others are still in Nepal. As a result of which, there are grave psychosocial issues arising among the camp residents. There is the longing for family reunification, and the ever constant precariousness has pushed many towards to depression. There is anxiety and even cases of suicide. That's mainly the findings of our chapter in the report. But looking at COVID-19, obviously because of the situation in the camps, there are reports of acute shortage of food, particularly in the Bhutanese refugee camps, because they are so dependent on donor agencies providing their food supplies. But more so, there are reports of Muslims and Christians being singled out for whatever they've done or not done. Just to give a few examples, recently there were 2 pastors who were arrested in Kathmandu, the capital, for holding religious services. Both the pastors have denied that they were holding services, with one explaining that people who were found at the church premises actually lived there, And the other one said that he had brought them together, his flock together, to explain to them the severity of the pandemic and to follow the government orders. But that did not cut any ice, and they were arrested. And of course, like learning, we learn a lot from what is going on in India. So just as there has been the targeting of Muslims in India, a spillover effect is being seen in Nepal as well, particularly with the issue of the Tablighi Jamaat congregation in Delhi, because there were Nepali Muslims also who had taken part in that meeting. The Indian media, in particular, was very vehement in its targeting of a Nepali Muslim elected official, because there have been allegations in media of Muslims spreading the virus. And similarly, in Nepal also, similar attempts have been made to target Muslims for reportedly spreading the virus. All kinds of funny ideas people get. But all of these stand in stark contrast to how the majority of religion is viewed or has been treated in Nepal. During the height of the lockdown, a major Hindu festival was organized in the capital, and it was allowed to proceed without any kind of intervention from the authorities. And in Western Nepal, there were thousands who gathered for another religious festival, which is a Hindu festival also. And all the government did was impose some fines on the officials. So that is the kind of situation we live in these crazy times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deepak. Thank you so much for your rich contribution. And Dr. Sajjad has joined us back. And can you hear us, Dr. Sajjad?
I can hear you.
Okay,
yeah.
So please, for the rest of your sharing, those were like almost 3 minutes left. So please go ahead with that. And then we would move on to next speaker.
So do you want me to start off from where I left off?
Yes, because and you'll be having only 3 minutes now.
Okay. So let me do a bit of fast reading.
Thank you.
And maybe, yeah, start from the beginning. I'm so sorry, everybody. It's just the internet playing tricks. Right. Let me do. Okay. Let me start from the beginning, and I'll read the first bits a bit faster than usual. So I was just saying that a great deal of the majoritarian nationalism that we see playing out across South Asia, particularly applies to India's case over the past 1 year, and rapidly we see majoritarianism growing with direct consequences on its minorities. But the principal point being that a great deal of this contestation has been around questions of citizenship, refugees, and migrants, the theme of our 2019 report, actually. So very timely, as Ferdinand also mentioned. India has traditionally been open to refugees and migrants, but this openness is not applied equally to all. So we have across the board different refugee groups either being welcomed, recognized officially, whereas some other groups are not recognized, and that they only live because they have, in a sense, assimilated within local communities, or the UNHCR recognizing them, but not the government itself. And some groups, particularly, we are seeing increasingly now Muslim groups like Rohingyas also facing, besides attacks and discrimination in society, also now being forced out by authorities to return to Myanmar, as we saw in some cases last year and the previous year. Now, part of the problem is structural. India has neither signed the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees, nor do we have our own domestic refugee law. As a result, refugees and migrants are treated on par with other foreigners. also denied some fundamental rights that foreigners are denied. Likewise, India has not also ratified the 1954 and 1961 conventions on statelessness. Hence, there's no legal recognition of stateless persons, and also the reason why you see different groups being treated differently. So, a great deal of arbitrariness and discrimination playing out also in treatment of different refugee groups. Now, since taking power in 2014, and that's when things begin to really move in a very sort of different direction. The BJP government has slowly turned this humanitarian issue into a religious one. In 2015, the government decreed through an executive order to allow specific groups, religious groups from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, minority groups, religious minority groups from the three countries, to stay on in India even without proper documentation. This consideration was not extended to persecuted Muslim communities, either from those countries or outside. Alongside, India has also been enfranchising some of its own citizens arbitrarily, and what I have in mind particularly is the preparation of the National Register of Citizens in Assam, an exercise that's been going on over the past several years, and that ended last year with the NRC register that excludes 1.9 million persons. All of those risk being made stateless. In conjunction with that, and just after that, in December 2019, the Parliament passed the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 Act, which in effect creates a fast track to Indian citizenship for illegal migrants from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, but which excludes Muslims from those countries, as well as other persecuted groups from other neighboring countries. Now, the direct consequence of the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, will be felt in Assam. In effect, it will mitigate the situation for all those excluded from the NRC, the 1.9 million persons, except specifically of Muslims. The two the 2019 law as well as the NRC process read in conjunction. Now, this arbitrariness and discrimination is being institutionalized under the current regime, with citizenship laws effectively being used for political ends, significantly amplifying the mass production of statelessness. Government now wants to scale up the NRC nationally, NRC which has just been concluded in Assam. Now it wants to scale it up across the country to detect, detain, and deport illegal migrants, illegal in inverted commas, a dog whistle term for Muslims, as the stated target. Senior ministers have gone to great lengths to explain how, together with the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, Muslim infiltrators will be disenfranchised and deported, whilst religious minorities from Muslim majority countries in the region will be benefited. Now, this overt show of discrimination was the background to the mass protest movements from about end December 2019, just after the CAA was signed into law, with opposition parties, students, civil society groups, and particularly Muslims and women amongst them taking to the streets across the length and breadth of the country, demanding withdrawal of the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and an end to the NRC process, which was being ramped up across the country. Authorities responded with lethal force and in police crackdowns, specifically in BJP-ruled states, in the provinces which the BJP rules particularly. There were massive police crackdowns resulting in over 30 deaths, hundreds injured, and mass detentions through much of the first weeks of the new year, 2020. This was followed by targeted attacks in Delhi, the capital, in February 2020, resulting in 53 deaths, mass displacement of populations, and yet more arrests and detentions, not of the attackers, rather of the victims of the violence, as well as student leaders at the forefront of the anti-CAA protests. Many have been charged, many of those who have been arrested have been charged under anti-terror laws and for other serious offenses. Almost all have been denied bail and languish in prisons amidst the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, as if majoritarianism had not done enough damage, COVID-19 provided it yet another opportunity to target Muslims and other minorities with a non-stop and organized campaign of Islamophobia, vilifying Muslims particularly. After authorities traced several cases of COVID-19 to a Muslim missionary organization the Tablighi Jamaat that Dr. Deepak fake news began circulating on social media, claiming that members of the organization, as well as other Muslims, were engaging in deliberate spread of the virus by, for example, spitting on people. Under the hashtag Corona Jihad, Muslims have been accused of using COVID-19 as a weapon against the Hindu population and interest. Senior leaders of the BJP to have contributed to spreading such misinformation. Throughout India, reports speak to violent attacks on Muslims and vandalism against mosques, boycott of small businesses, and sick people being denied treatment in hospital, and hospitals segregating Muslim patients in separate wards. This accelerated form of Islamophobia has mostly gone unchallenged by authorities. To conclude, COVID-19 has left minorities in India more vulnerable than before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sajjad. Thank you so much for your rich contribution, and gladly the technology helped this time to have you. Okay, so with this, our next speaker, I would like to invite Ms. Aleem Alam. She's from FACES, which is an organization based in Pakistan. And the chapter they have contributed is the struggle for equal citizenship. Aleem has served already as an advisor to the Ministry for Human Rights and Minority Affairs of Government of Punjab. And she's the founding member and Secretary General of this organization. So Aleem, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nomana, and thank you to all the participants attending this. 42 to 45 participants is an encouraging number on a webinar. So thank you everybody for joining this session today, and especially to Professor Fernan. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to talk about this report in your presence, and to have your comments and feedback on this as well. So it's an absolute pleasure. Coming to our report, I'll actually just follow the format that we've been talking about for this webinar, and I think it'll be much easier. So the major group that the refugees, the major groups that are refugees and stateless in Pakistan are mainly the second largest refugee population in the world, which is the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. So as Afghanistan was mentioning initially, being first in line of these presentations, even though our report every year focuses on religious minorities, the stateless and refugee community in Pakistan is not actually a religious minority. They in fact belong to the larger majority population of the Muslim majority. So that's the largest refugee population that we have in Pakistan. And then the report then goes on to talk about the gender discrimination with our citizenship laws. And it also talks about the Rohingya refugees and the Bihari Muslim refugees in Pakistan. So these are the different groups that the report is talking about. The two very grave issues and findings that we found in the report are, one, that Pakistan is not a signatory to either the Refugee Convention, nor is it signatory to the stateless communities convention. So we haven't ratified both of these. This really puts us in a problem, because we do not have neither an international framework to follow, which is there, nor do we have a local framework to follow. So our laws are also very outdated. The citizenship law is dated back to 1961, and we also have not. There has been a lot of discussion in Parliament. In fact, a summary was submitted in the cabinet as well. There was something ready on having a refugee policy or a migrant policy, and this was about 2 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago. But unfortunately, nothing came about of that as well. The second problem also is that this population is so large that it seems the response of the government and the UNHCR in Pakistan has been very, very weak. It's a large population, and till now it has not been decided effectively whether the refugees should be going back to whether they should be returning or whether they should be staying in Pakistan. The report also talks about one finding, which is the weak institutional framework that Pakistan has. So even though we have one of the best electronic systems for data registration, which is the National Database Registration Authority, it has a very good overall electronic system, but the gap really lies with the SOPs and the framework that it follows, because even though the government announced between 2 years ago about having birth registrations for Afghan refugee children, at least, because in fact we do follow the other conventions on the rights of the child and the UDHR, because we do follow that. That has not been incorporated yet, and so it leaves out this population entirely, and the children in fact are stateless. Of course, they cannot go to any schools. They're not accepted by the health system. They're not accepted by the social security system, and that is also, in fact, impacting them with the COVID-19 situation. And I'll just come to that. The gender discrimination within the citizenship laws problem is also important to consider, because if a Pakistani woman marries a foreigner, she cannot confer her citizenship to her spouse and to her children, in fact. So that also is one aspect of the report. The third is the Rohingya Muslims, the Rohingya population. Largely they're constituted in the Sindh province, not so much in the other provinces. But with the Rohingyas, the problem also is the law, the outdated law of 1961, because it says that anybody who has been in Pakistan only before 1971 can be a citizen. That is when West Pakistan and East Pakistan got separated. So that puts that population still in a problem to date. And then, of course, it's the Bihari Muslims, and I won't repeat that because my colleagues have also repeated it, and it's very similar, the situation. So this is the context of the refugees and the stateless populations in Pakistan. And again, I stress that it's the weak institutional framework and the legal framework. So both tied up together, it creates a grave problem for these populations. COVID-19 has also taken a toll on these populations, because as one of my colleagues mentioned previously, and when I said that the problem, I mean, it's an age-long problem now with this refugee population, and there's nothing being decided about them. And their population, there are formal settlements and there are informal settlements. So with the formal settlements, which are registered with UNHCR, there's probably repatriations, and there's also interventions of the government and the UNHCR. So if there is, like with the COVID-19 crisis, only about 300 refugees have been registered for the government relief scheme. Because otherwise, in fact, if you consider almost a 2 million population of refugees, they cannot register for this because they do not have a national identity card. They have the proof of registration card only. So only about 300 from this have been registered by the government for a relief program. Otherwise, this population constitutes mostly of daily wagers. They are rag pickers, or all belong to the informal job sector, which again is not a registered sector in Pakistan. So the informal job sector is also, it just gets lost because there are no benefits for them, and these people are daily wagers. So because they live in informal settlements, we are basically advocating for there to be some kind of relief scheme for these refugees. But then again, relief may not be the only solution, because they live so close together. They have about 3 families of average 7 members each living in one in 4 walls. that creates a problem for the social, yes, I'm just ending. That also creates a problem for the hygiene aspect and the social distancing, which is an absolute next to impossible task for the refugee communities. So this is basically part of our advocacy. And I'd just like to add here briefly that because we are also working with religious minorities, and the South Asia Collective has a strong focus on this. At the moment, there is, I mean, you can't say there is no particular discrimination with religious minorities regarding these schemes in terms of, for example, saying they won't get it or they should be left out of it. In fact, we have reports of many organizations being reached by the government scheme to register for this, particularly with religious minorities. But the problem lies in the very, very weak structures also. If the relief scheme, for example, reaches only out of 20 million people, if it reaches only 1 million people, and of course most Pakistanis, the socioeconomic situation of religious minorities is so weak, there is a big question mark on how many people these schemes will, how many religious minorities will this actually get to, and that this condition for religious minorities will actually worsen by June, when we expect the trajectory to go really high in Pakistan. So, thank you very much. I'll end here.
Thank you so much, Aline, for your great contribution and sharing your experience and about the chapter. So now I would like to invite our last speaker of the day, and after that we would take a round of questions and answers. So our last speaker is Ms. Shakuntala Kadirgamar from Law and Society Trust, Sri Lanka. She is the director of the organization, and she has worked with United Nations and several other international organizations and research institutions to promote good governance and sustainable development. The chapter which is contributed in this report is Discrimination Against Religious Minorities and its Impact on Inclusion in a Plural Society. So over to you, Ms. Shakuntala.
To acknowledge,
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
I'm okay? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. And I would like to acknowledge the chapter writer, the author of this chapter, who was Tehani Ariyarachman. And unfortunately, she was not there at the launch of the report, but I really would like to acknowledge the hard work that she put into it. As you know, I think many of our countries have exceptional situations. The whole approach of the report, which was supposed to be on statelessness and the treatment of the state religious minorities, Sri Lanka's situation is a little different. We did have a very large stateless population for many, many years. The Indian Tamils, the Tamils from India were brought to work on the plantations, occupied that space for decades, in fact, before independence. And they continue to work in Sri Lanka. They, in fact, soon after we got independence, they voted in the first election. They had representatives in parliament. And then Sri Lanka introduced the law, which is rather like the draconian law being introduced in India today, to prove your origins in the country. And many people could not prove, the unbroken history of residence in Sri Lanka, and they were rendered stateless. And this was a situation for many, many years, but they were offered citizenship in 1984, and not for very altruistic reasons, but rather to remove them from the area of India's concerns in the context of our ethnic conflicts. Many people had no relationship with India, and so they opted to take Sri Lankan citizenship, but they were not really treated as full citizens, and they had a lot of experiences of social and economic marginalization. Today, however, they are significant because they're significant vote bank, but nevertheless, their requests tend to be taken seriously during elections, the election run up to elections, and then their issues are rather ignored later. However, having clarified that we don't have that stateless population, we nevertheless have a serious issue about the treatment of minorities. Initially, it was the issues that were contested religious and ethnic minorities, linguistic minorities, but increasingly the division now is on religious minorities. But before I speak too much on the report, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the context in which we worked on this report and how the context has changed somewhat after the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2018 and 19, when we wrote this report, all our discussions were around the shrinking civic space and the back foot that democracy was taking. And as a result of it, the whole plural identity and the commitment to pluralism that South Asia was famous for is under siege. And in this period of time, Sri Lanka too, like many other South Asian countries, has really regressed, I think, in that treatment of its minorities and giving them equal protected citizenship. In fact, in Sri Lanka, this has led to a 30-year ethnic conflict and into a full-blown out war with devastating consequences. And even after the war was concluded and the government did defeat the Tamil Tigers, they didn't use that space, the peace, to really redefine the social contract between the communities in Sri Lanka. And in spite of the undoubted victory in the war, they didn't use this opportunity to discuss political arrangements, economic arrangements to integrate the minorities on terms of equality. But having, I would say, pacified the Tamils to some extent, the attention has now focused on the Muslim minorities. And while the recent Easter Sunday bombings were the most significant things that have caught the international community's attention, and the fact that this was a terrorist attack and what this could mean for the future security of the country and the region, we have to acknowledge that there were a series of violent acts against the Muslim community in the last few years, which were not related to any terrorist acts as well. So there's been a tension building up. And these are the issues that, this is the context in which this report was framed. However, Sri Lanka had general elections, presidential elections in 2015. And one of the commitments made was to reinstall good governance and democratic principles, and the minorities threw their weight behind this project. They truly believed in this, in the commitments that were made, and they did believe that it would make a difference if they all voted as one to really improve the democratic polity. And a common candidate was chosen. He was victorious. There were commitments promised to have constitutional reforms, to curtail presidential powers, to really restore democracy in Sri Lanka. But I'm afraid over a short period of time, these promises evaporated. The coalition fell apart, and none of these commitments were followed. So it is in this context of shrinking democratic space and shrinking civic space that we're now looking at minorities. And I think, you have to see the two together, really. But of course, we also faced with a problematic situation where democracy is increasingly being defined as a majoritarian exercise, and not with the full, the value system of a democracy, which means commitment to human rights. Democracy is not simply the majority will, but the largest number who conform within a principle of human rights and human rights standards and values. And that is something that is missing in Sri Lanka and many other countries in the region. Looking specifically at the report that we developed, as I said, we didn't focus so much on statelessness in Sri Lanka, but we had to also, we had to recognize that we don't have many refugees in Sri Lanka, but we have been net exporters of refugees to many countries, especially to India, to Australia, Canada, the UK. All these countries have seen large numbers of refugees leaving to these countries, and many of them have been given citizenship and have been integrated into those communities. The refugees from Sri Lanka in India are still recognized as Sri Lankan citizens, but they've had very little contact with Sri Lanka over 30 years. And their children are people who are like born in between and in limbo. So there is a problem. They're not stateless, but they are refugees and they will have integration problems or acceptance problems in India. So we've created some of these problems, but we have not had a significant refugee population in Sri Lanka. We've had a few cases of refugees from Pakistan and Afghanistan, largely Christians or Ahmadis, and more recently, Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar. Their numbers are so small, you can really count them on your hands and feet. But nevertheless, they have not been very welcome here. They are really recognized by UNHCR and looking for third country asylum. But in the aftermath of the Easter bombings, a lot of attention was focused on them. And if they came from Muslim countries, and if they were not Muslims, they were subjected to harassment. And in the case of the Rohingyas, because they came from Myanmar and they are Muslims, they are also subjected to harassment. So one of the findings I would find from our report is, unfortunately, in spite of our well-renowned hospitality towards tourists and foreigners, we have not been welcoming towards refugees. And I think that is very unfortunate. It is unfortunate that we have not ratified the UN Convention on Refugees, which will create a framework within which we would be held accountable. And in fact, our whole response towards international conventions, many of which we have signed, but not created enabling legislation, has meant that many international treaties are not fully implemented. And that is a gap that could have been looked at through the constitutional reform process, but that hasn't come to be. In terms of minorities, in our post-independence compact, we recognize personal laws of minorities. We recognize their right to non-discrimination and religious freedom, but that is in the constitution. But there is a subtext of now a much more majoritarian approach towards the religions and religious identity. And somehow Buddhism has preeminent status, even though other religions are equal. So it's rather like a prime minister and a cabinet. One is more equal than the other, but we have never really understood what that means. In terms of the COVID-19 and how it has impacted on the situation of religious minorities, in the early days of the pandemic, and I think almost as a response to Mr. Trump's constant references to the virus as a Chinese virus, there was a lot of suspicion towards Chinese people, especially the construction workers and others who work in Sri Lanka. And apparently there were newspaper reports of them being treated not very nicely and people refusing to serve them at restaurants. And the government took the extraordinary measure of making statements that we should not identify the virus with the community and we should not discriminate against them. But soon after that, whenever there were Muslim people who were considered infected, there was a great deal of attention paid, especially in the military press briefings, that so many Muslims were affected. So many Muslims had not quarantined themselves after their foreign trips, or had not divulged the fact that they had been at religious gatherings where there were infected people. And the whole presentation of it was that this was being spread by Muslims, and this is a challenge. However, in more recent times, we've also found that our Navy has been the carriers, and many are infected, and many of them were doing the logistical support around distribution of food and all that during the curfew time. And so now I think there's less of a stress on ethnicity, religion, and occupation in terms of how the virus is being spread. But nevertheless, damage is done when it's identified with one community as opposed to the other. We have another, because of the information gaps, and you have to recognize that in Sri Lanka, we've been under curfew from March, from the first week of March. So it's almost coming on 2 months. And what is more, Parliament has been dissolved, anticipating general elections. So really the robust questioning of the government's strategy, its responses, etc., are lacking in Sri Lanka. And as a result of it, we really don't know how well the supplies are being distributed. We are told of the infection rates, but we don't know how many people are being tested. So there is a sort of gray area, an information deficit. And so we are all a bit suspicious about figures and strategy, etc. But having said that, for Sri Lanka to know, for us to know whether all ethnic communities or religious communities are being served equally, whether they're getting supplies, whether they're getting the relief supplies, that is difficult to identify at this time. And it would have helped if there was a parliament in place and individual MPs would be looking out for their constituencies. And the absence of that is one of the serious challenges. And although general elections are set for the 20th of June, it's very unlikely they can be held. And then the fear is what happens then. So at the moment, our whole response to COVID has been very much a sort of a militarized response, because the military is taking the control of a lot of the distribution of supplies.
Ms. Shakuntala, we are running out of time. May I request you to please conclude quickly?
That we have. So this is the status that we are in. Thank you. I'm sorry if we.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your rich input. We are thankful to all our speakers today. And now we have a few minutes left for the questions and answers round, and we do receive a few very interesting questions from our all our participants here in the webinar today. So the question, because a couple of questions are from Dr. Sajjad, and therefore I would like to share with you. So one question from the Nushika is that how do you see the rising of Islamophobia in the context of COVID-19? Particularly, and secondly, when we see the violations of basic rights when it comes to the right to health, for instance, for religious minorities across the South Asian, how South Asian governments can deal with that phobia or discriminations simultaneously when they are probably directly or indirectly promoting such kind of sentiments. And the second question is with regards to the situation in Kashmir, particularly nowadays, or of course from last few months, several weeks, especially after the abrogation of Article 370. So how do you see these situations, and what can be done?
Right. Thank you very much. So very quickly on the first question. Well, I was hoping that Shakuntala would want to take that question, frankly. Thank you, Dinsika, for raising that issue. Well, I'm just trying to read, just to try to understand. So the question really is about going beyond civil rights, also to issues of discrimination in health care. Yes, meaning, well, and I can speak only to the situation in India. The examples of how, for instance, particularly groups linked to the Tablighi Jamaat, they've been in quarantine after the incident happened, and for over and not allowed to leave, although the rule says 14 days of quarantine, and then after that you move on, etc., etc. So they're hearing stories there. Also, specific cases of how hospitals, well, in one particular hospital actually advertised that they'll not be taking Muslim patients. There was another hospital which tried to establish separate wards, so sort of segregating, etc. But I think what you're really asking is the issue of privacy. And maybe I'm not the best person to answer that question. I do not know, Shakuntala, if you've seen how this thing has played out in Sri Lanka, in the context of Islamophobia, but also how particularly Muslims might have been affected. And I'm really sorry not to be able to answer that question, but if I can take the other one on Kashmir, I don't know. Well, to be honest, I have to say I'm at a loss for words. When discrimination and targeting takes place at, people look to courts and justice institutions for relief. Sadly, courts have not been providing much relief in Kashmir. The press media is a medium to report and voice concerns. That has been gagged. freedom of assembly and speech has anyway been curtailed with the continuing internet restrictions and also curtailment of people's ability to go out and protest, etc. And all those able to provide leadership, political leaders, human rights workers, activists, lawyers, large numbers continue to be in detention. So what does one do? How can you? I mean, the question that you asked is really is what can mitigate the situation, provide people some relief. One does. I really don't know what. Meaning, authorities will probably have to come to a point where they recognize that this is not sustainable. That you cannot go on caging a population like this forever, and that making these big both legislative changes, but also preventing people from raising the voice against some of those legislation, and I see absolutely similar trend in pattern in how the laws in the rest of the country too have been sort of changed, amended, and I'm referring to the Citizenship Amendment Act, and how when people protest, authorities are going after them, including use of force and mass detention. So this is not sustainable for any population. You cannot target minorities or any population for that matter, and then hope that you can contain when people will raise their voices, etc. I just hope good sense prevails from authorities. That's all I could say. I'm so sorry I'm not able to provide any pointed response to that question on mitigation.
Thank you so much. So the next question is from Professor Renes. So the question is from refugee from the International Dalit Solidarity Network, Denmark, and he's basically asking that what is your opinion about the ongoing pressure building upon the Indian government by some minority-related discrimination, calling out by the UAE activists or the Saudi Arabia, and along with some international human rights departments and network, and with Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So do you think that it seemingly, according to him, creating some kind of effect, but what would you say that in the long run, would it be able to slow down the present kind of ongoing incidents in India, or encourage the government to take step against that?
I think I would answer by saying, first of all, that there has been some pressure from different international organizations in relation to the NCR, in relation to the CIA, the Citizenship Amendment Act in India. But I don't think there has been enough. I think, first of all, yes, it does have an impact. Any kind of outside pressure is something which governments may at one point respond to. And even though it hasn't changed anything yet, I think a lot more should be done, quite frankly. My own mandate has been involved, as you know. Other parts of the United Nations have been involved. However, I think there are, in terms of NGOs, there are many international human rights organizations, or many more, which could also get involved in increased pressure. I know MRG has been quite active in relation to the statelessness issue in India. But there are others, because when we're talking about issues of statelessness, citizenship, also of the increase of hate speech, this is something which everyone should be concerned with. So I think there are a large number of other major world NGOs that could also be much more vocal and present and increase pressure. The OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, I think has been involved. I think it actually should be much more vocal and visible in this area, as should also other entities within the United Nations and other international organizations. So what I'm saying is that the issues occurring in India currently, particularly in relation to citizenship and statelessness, are so fundamental and of a scale unheard of in the recent past, that many, many more organizations, entities should increase pressure, and that a lot more should be done. There may be something to be said even for the UN General Assembly to be much more active. So I think pressure can have an impact. I think it has made the Indian government wonder a bit, hesitate somewhat in some areas, and was beginning to respond in the ways that it did not in the past. But I'm actually quite surprised that more pressure hasn't been done by a much wider category of organizations, because I think that is possible and it should be explored, actually, in my opinion. Would you like me to say anything else?
Okay. Have we lost the moderator? I was also asked, I see some questions addressed to me, and I want to also respond to Sajad's question. We all feel a little helpless and hopeless now because we see governments having shut down many of the traditional areas of the channels through which we could challenge governments, the courts, the parliament, the press, all these institutions now seem to be complicit as well in this spreading of hate speech and majoritarianism, anti-Muslim feeling, anti-minorities. So we kind of feel a little trapped and not knowing which mechanisms to use. And in this majoritarian outbidding, no one wants to, not even the opposition parties, don't want to stick their necks out and speak against something that they know is blatantly and palpably wrong. But maybe this is a time for civil society groups, I mean, nationally and regionally, to get together a little and strategize. The system seems hopeless, but you know, things have been hopeless in other contexts too. I mean, the rise of fascism, the lead up to various world wars, the total control that some communist regimes had, and somehow people prevailed. So I think we have to stop really thinking of how hopeless and look at the opportunities. I think that the chaos created by the pandemic and the economic disasters that are going to face all these countries, it will create a xenophobic, nationalistic response, but it will also create an opportunity because countries cannot fight many wars on many fronts. They need their national polity to get behind them. I mean, the Muslim community is very large in India. They're also in trade and business and finance. And, you know, can you constantly have a war against them to suppress them and then also expect to develop and advance? Likewise in Sri Lanka. So I think we have to sort of look for those opportunities as well before we cave in. But yes, this is a difficult situation because many fundamental rights are being challenged. The right to privacy, the right to healthcare, information, the civil and political rights. I mean, look at even in Sri Lanka, we are told that the whole curfew and the whole infrastructure by which we have been shut down are illegal because they are legal if they were held under emergency regulations. But the government does not want to have an emergency declared because they would need to go back to parliament, and parliament has been dissolved. So they're all enmeshed. So really what is happening is the government is going down a path of many unconstitutional maneuvers, which may come to haunt them later. So really civil society has to, you know, be vigilant about this with the mechanisms that we have at hand. And we need to get a legal profession to, you know, to motivate, to fall behind these challenges. So these are some of the issues that we really see emerging out of this COVID situation, and the treatment of minorities is part of that spectrum, but there are a wider scale of civil liberties that are being threatened under this system, under the guise of the pandemic.
Yeah, if I'll respond to, and thank you for those contributions. I'll respond to perhaps one thing. Your comments make me think that perhaps this is a period for reflection about how we can redouble efforts to strengthen the human rights mechanisms. Because I think if one thing has been shown is that the gains that we thought internationally we had made to protect human rights universally are not as strong as that. It's really not protecting those communities that are the most vulnerable, in particular minorities, migrants, and refugees. One other comment, though, I think what in some countries such as India and Pakistan, there was mention that both countries have not ratified any of the treaties dealing with statelessness. That may be true, but my understanding is that both in the case of India and Pakistan, they've ratified or acceded to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And the reason I mention that is that Article 26 is a general prohibition of discrimination. Discrimination is the main issue, by the way. It is the main legal issue in relation to statelessness affecting minorities. Most countries, I would say in all situations where you have countries targeting minorities, specifically like the Rohingya in Myanmar, like the Muslim minority in Myanmar, as I said, the Biharis in Bangladesh, the Nepalese in Bhutan, and the situation in India. Those are issues of discrimination. Equality and discrimination is one of the fundamental human rights in international law, and therefore that really is the main tool to defend minorities that are being targeted, frankly, for processes that could lead to statelessness or the denial of their citizenship. That fundamental human right is a very powerful legal tool and also symbolic tool that can be used in relation to statelessness and citizenship determination specifically, and also in relation to the rise of hate speech that many minorities are experiencing in South Asia. So I just want to mention that very quickly because there's something very powerful that can be used. And I was a little bit dismayed because I had the sense that there was the assumption that because India and Pakistan had not ratified treaties specifically on statelessness, that somehow left the issues of statelessness outside of any kind of legal mechanism. That is not accurate, I would say. I would suggest to you that, in fact, non-discrimination is the most powerful human right tool you can use, once again, from a legal point of view, but also from a moral human rights position. Not many governments both claim that we should be allowed to discriminate in the sense of violating one of the pillars of the international human rights protection mechanism. And I apologize if that sounded almost like a speech, but it's a basic right which I think is not always appreciated, that it is available because in both the case of India and Pakistan, I think, if my memory serves me right, both have acceded to or ratified the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and it's Article 26 that applies also to citizenship determination on any kind of obstacles to citizenship that might lead to statelessness or any other kind of situation.
Thank you so much, Professor Brins. So sorry, I was a little bit out from the webinar because of some internet complications, but just got back. So we would like to have some final thoughts from our speakers, especially who haven't spoken yet after the questions answers round. So if you want to say something, anyone from our speakers who haven't spoken yet in the question answers round?
Well, I had the last word, which I feel rather bad to say it again, but I just reiterate that because we are at this very critical juncture, we have seen, you know, in all our countries in the region, we see the political civic space shrinking. we see the rise of a very majoritarian, hostile kind of nationalism taking place. And on top of it, we have this pandemic, which is causing enormous stresses and strains. We are going to have a lot of economic hardship in the region. We have no saviors who are going to help us financially, because globally everybody is in difficult circumstances. So we are going to have to pull ourselves out of this situation, and we can look at a destructive way of trying to resolve our issues, or we can think of the hard and tried and trusted way, but really building a kind of national unity. We need leadership for that, and none of our political leaders seem to be showing any of that courage. So we may have to look at alternative forms of leadership. I see the business community being relied on a lot more to step up to the plate to help with economic recovery, etc. So maybe we have to look for champions in unknown places to build coalitions with to address these issues. Certainly, I know in countries like Sri Lanka, every time you have a pogrom and a purge, it sets business back, it sets development back. So if that is the only way people are going to listen to these human rights issues, maybe we should find ways of even using that language. I mean, I think human rights stand on its own, but if we can't get converts there, we'll have to look at very selfish reasons as to why they should protect a different environment. And that's about the concluding remark I can make, that we've got to find ways and means of making people realize that human rights are a value in themselves. They're also an end, they're means to an end of a different kind of society. So I think that is the only thing I can think of, because I think this hostility towards minorities is degrading the national polity. India is so diminished as a result of this. I mean, it was the beacon in the region. We all
Thank you so much, Ms. Shakuntala. Actually, now we are running out of time, and I would like to thanks once again to all the people who have joined us, to all distinguished speakers. Thank you for joining us, especially to Professor Prunendit, because he has been joining us this very, very, very early morning, according to his time. Thank you so much, Professor. And we would like to thank you all. And of course, we cannot have taken up all the questions, but what we can do is that we have your questions, and we would forward those to the speakers you have asked for, and we would forward their contact to you as well, maybe after asking them, so you can have conversation afterwards. And you can all the friends, all the colleagues who have joined us, you can find a link in the chat box to download this report, and you can always follow us through our bulletin on the South Asia Collective website, and follow us on the Twitter as well. So thank you so much once again. It was very, very informative, very, very enriching experience and talk from the speakers, and very qualitative, good quality of questions we have received from the participants. So thank you once again. Hope to see you around sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck.